my game has a big problem, and that is that it looks terrible. Today I'll be completely overhauling the visuals of A Farmer's Life, breaking down each change step by step, and trust me, there is a lot to cover. Hey, HannahMouse1 here. For those who don't know me, I am an aspiring game dev focused on proving that professional quality games can be created using beginner-friendly software like Scratch. My main project, A Farmer's Life, is a farming game inspired by Stardew Valley that has been in the works for 2 years now, and today we are tackling its visuals. This game is in desperate need of a facelift. I've been aware of this for a while, but I've kept putting it off because I knew that it would be a massive task to correct, and the longer I delayed, the bigger the challenge became, but it's finally time to address it. Oh, and a huge shout out to Matt. You might know him from his devlog series on Clean Up on Our Goblin or his fantastic pixel art tutorials. His feedback not only motivated me to tackle the art overhaul, but helped me pinpoint exactly what was wrong with the old visuals and how to fix them. His advice was the catalyst for everything I changed in this devlog, and I'll be referencing it throughout. Since I can't overhaul the entire game before this devlog's release, I'll be focusing on the playable areas such as the farm, the farmhouse, and the quarry. To make this task more manageable, I broke it down into easily actionable subtasks, which were 1. Sticking to a cohesive colour palette, 2. Adding outlines and shadows to key objects, and 3. Ensuring consistent detail across all assets. Now, I've always struggled with colour palettes, finding them restrictive, but Matt's video on creating colour palettes was a lifesaver. My new palette does have more colours than a usual palette, but it's cohesive and intentional. Before, clashing colours like overly saturated greens against muted browns made the visual very jarring. The new palette is more muted but a lot more harmonious. I also incorporated hue shifting, where darker colours lean more colder towards purple, where bright colours lean warmer towards yellow. This subtle touch makes the art feel more realistic. Starting with the base tiles, I applied the new palette to the grass tiles first, but a simple palette swap just wasn't enough. The grass tile was the oldest asset in the game, lacking detail compared to the newer assets. I retained the checkerboard look, but added shading and detail. You'll notice occasional tweaks to the palette as I worked. Some much needed adjustments only became clear during implementation. Next, I updated the river tiles to match the new palette, and while the animation stayed mostly the same, I redrew the edges to align with the redesigned tiles. For the tilled dirt, I halved the widths of the rows and made them less rigid, with water tiles just being a darker version of these. Redrawing the edge tiles between the grass and dirt was a significant task, which went through multiple iterations before I found out something that suited my needs. I was able to find a template on Google Images to guide me through this, with the new system requiring 46 different tiles. And I made this system as modular as possible to ensure seamless rendering for all edge types. To truly test the new look, I started with a few key objects: rocks, trees, the perimeter fence, and the fully grown wheat. Each asset was outlined, with the bottom edges left unoutlined to ground them visually, which was a direct suggestion from Matt's feedback, and I also added drop shadows baked into the art. The player character got a revamp too. While customizable parts like skin and hair remained palette independent, I used the new palette for the overalls and rounded out the design to look less, as Matt put it, like a Roblox character. I updated the UI as well, removing the thick brown border and redesigning the tabs, tool icons, and money display to be smaller, cuter, and more cohesive. Here's a quick before and after, which got great feedback and confirmed that I was on the right track. Encouraged by this feedback, I dove into a full art marathon. I redrew all the crop stages, trees, bushes, and workspaces. Of these, the last two got the most notable overhauls. The bushes now each have a unique look based on the type of fruit that they produce, where before they were just palette swaps of a single asset. As for the workspaces, I focused on making them a lot smaller, as before they were rather obnoxious. I then tackled the quarry, making new stone floor tiles, ore, crystals, and the stone perimeter. I also redesigned the tools and upgraded the UI for the watering cans and the health bars, replacing the segmented bars with sliding ones for greater flexibility. Griffpatch has a great tutorial on these, which I will link down below. I also redid the art for the farmhouse, including the floors, walls, and furniture. Alongside this, I updated the building tools, such as the options to open the build menu and to move, rotate, store, or deselect objects. To streamline navigation, I decided that only essential tabs would appear on any given page. For example, you'll only be able to access tabs like the inventory or completion log from the farm, while other areas will only allow navigation to the map. This reduces visual clutter on the screen. Additionally, the build tab option for the farmhouse has been moved from the toolbar to the tab bar for better organization. With all the objects redrawn, I had to revisit the collision system. The new designs, especially for the workspaces, required updated collision masks, and the sprites used for collision calculations had become misaligned due to me removing the border from the perimeter of the screen. I also revamped the mouse over name labels for the tabs. These now stand out against the background without relying on the border, ensuring they remain clear and readable. Finally, I revisited the player's art, applying the new palette to all of the costumes and adding outlines. Since most of the clothing items share the same silhouette, I only needed to create new sprites for unique places like the hats or standout elements, which significantly reduced my workload. The visual update is far from complete. I still need to redo the art for every other tab, page and shop in the game, as well as every single item in the inventory. Beyond that, I want to add smaller enhancements like particle effects or object shake to give the players more visual feedback when performing actions like destroying objects. My game just received a big visual makeover, but under the hood it's still a total mess. Repeated code, duplicate sprites and inefficient systems have caused the file size to balloon, and for working on this game to become a frustrating chore. But it's time to fix that, so let's jump right in. And today we are continuing the focus on the visual overhaul that we started in the last devlog, focusing on the items and the inventory page. I started by redrawing every item in the new style, prioritizing 3 things: using the updated color palette, adding more detail, especially to older assets, and incorporating more diagonals to break away from the rigid square shapes. Previously, each item had a built-in background box, which meant that I needed separate versions whenever the box wasn't needed or had to be a different color. Now, items have a versatile shadow instead, allowing me to use the same asset everywhere and to simply add a box when necessary. In total, I had to remake over 200 items, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it sounds. Many items like the different types of seeds, pickles, jams and drinks could share similar designs, and the more recent assets already had enough detail, so I just applied the new palette. I also used these items for the inventory tab icons, making them consistent with the new style. The tab labels are redone to match the ones from the previous devlog. Another long overdue feature was a text manager. Since I use custom fonts, anytime I had to add in new text, I had to copy in each letter manually, an absolute time sink. With the new art update requiring me to recolor every text asset anyway, and with the narrative side of the game coming soon, which means a lot of dialogue boxes, this was the perfect time to fix it. The system is pretty simple for now. It supports the 2 main fonts, it automatically adjusts line breaks to fit within a set width, and the text is left aligned for now, but I can add more options like centered text later if needed. If you would like a tutorial on how this works, let me know and I'd be happy to make one. I integrated this system into the inventory UI, using it to display item names, quantities, placement restrictions, and additional information like bait power. This allowed me to delete a ton of old assets, including mouse over labels and UI elements that previously had baked in text. I also made some gameplay tweaks to the inventory system. Items unlock gradually rather than being visible from the start. This helps reinforce the sense of progression. For example, the tier 2 crops that require a lab upgrade, or the animal products which require the barn to be built. And the furniture items were removed from the main inventory since they're only relevant when decorating the farmhouse, which has its own menu. Here's a before and after of the inventory. I do feel like it could use something in the background, but I'm not sure what. If you have any ideas, let me know. The completion log has a similar setup to the inventory, so I tackled that next. I created tab icons for the achievements and friendship sections, while the rest were repurposed from the inventory tabs. The log layout is mostly the same as the inventory UI, but instead of showing current quantities, it tracks how many of each item you've collected overall. Some extra details like placement restrictions were removed since they aren't relevant here. Undiscovered items appear here in grayscale, an idea suggested by someone on the channel Discord. Fun fact, in Scratch you can make a sprite grayscale by setting the color effect to infinity. The friendship tab required some tricky recoloring, especially for skin tones. The human eye is very sensitive to subtle color shifts in faces, and in some cases I think the older versions looked better. But one thing I've learned from this update is that consistency matters more than individual assets. Even if a few of the sprites looked better before, the overall game benefits from having a cohesive style. You might notice that I didn't touch the achievements tab yet. That's because I'm planning to add new achievements in this update, so I'll handle all that at once. One thing I did do though was to update the completion bar to match the new UI colors and to reposition it so that it doesn't clash with the text boxes. Here's a before and after of the completion log. Finally, I moved the pickup icons from their own independent sprite into the inventory icon sprite, eliminating yet another set of unnecessary assets. What makes a game satisfying? That's the question we'll be exploring today as I continue my work on A Farmer's Life. And if you've been following the past couple devlogs, you'll know that I'm currently working on a visual overhaul for the game. That is something we'll be continuing today with a focus on making the game as satisfying as possible for the player. The goals for today are to redraw the map, to rework the tasks and achievement systems, and making small visual improvements to farm gameplay. The old map needed serious help. It was overly saturated, lacked detail, and just felt more like a list of icons than an actual place. It just didn't fit the game's new aesthetic. I started by sketching a new map layout, incorporating key features like a river running past the farm and fishing hut, a rocky quarry area, and distinct biomes, including grassy fields with oak trees, blue-hued pine forests, and rocky treeless zones. To enhance realism, I added small environmental details like trees near the hardware store being cut down, implying Andy used them for construction. Paths and roads now connect buildings, making the town feel more cohesive and explorable. For interactive location buttons, I created a modified version of the map with the placeholders for constructible locations. Each building required 3 icons, a base image with additional infrastructure such as roads, a highlighted version with a white outline and a name label, and a mouse over hitbox for interaction. I then coded these buttons so that they function properly, allowing players to click them to navigate through the world. Here's a before and after of the map. I'd ask you which one you prefer, but honestly, if you don't like the new one, I might cry. One of the least satisfying experiences in a game is not knowing what to do next. To fix this, I refined 2 systems designed to guide and motivate players: tasks, which are short to mid-term goals, and achievements, which are the long-term milestones. I expanded the task system significantly, taking inspiration from Minecraft's advancement system. Tasks are now organized into different tabs for different gameplay aspects: farming, mining, animals, and cooking. And I might add a friendship-related task in future updates as I move towards the story portion of the game. The tasks now have unique icons, often repurposed from inventory items or map buildings, arrows indicating task progression, a red exclamation mark for new tasks, a green one for completed tasks with claimable reward, and a tick for if the task has been both completed and claimed. There's also dynamic UI that labels locked tasks with 3 question marks and displays details when hovered over for unlocked tasks such as the name and what you must do to complete them. The completion bar also displays on the task page, as tasks will now also contribute to the overall completion score. And while I did start to implement some of the completion tracking, some features like the farm and quarry expansions I will be tackling in a future update. These are features that I have not added yet, but I know that I want to, so I wanted tasks for these. Achievements are meant to challenge completionists, so I expanded them as well. Previously, there was only one Harvest All Crops achievement, but with the introduction of Tier 2 and exotic crops, I decided to split this into multiple categories, one for each crop tier, and separate achievements for fruits and berries. Goods are also divided now into 3 tiers based on the ingredients used to craft them. To help players track missing items, I made sure that the UI also displays an item's tier or type when hovered over in the completion log, and I optimized the achievement pop-up system. Previously, the achievement names were baked into the art, requiring 3 separate costumes per achievement. Now the text is dynamically generated, reducing the asset count and making future additions easier. To enhance visual appeal and interactivity, I made several small but meaningful changes to the farm experience, starting with ground tile variation. A comment on YouTube from F Traveler suggested that I break up the repetitiveness of the grass tile, which I fully agreed with, so I created 3 variations each of flowers, pebbles, and small shrubs that can appear in the grass, and these now randomly populate the farm, making the environment feel more natural. To improve the object placement experience, I added a ghost image preview of the object before placing it, similar to what was already in the farmhouse, a new UI panel displaying the item's name, quantity, and placement conditions, and redesigned the back button so that it fits the updated aesthetic. I wanted interactions on the farm to feel more tactile, so I added an object shake effect. Individual objects now shake slightly when hit, in addition to the pre-existing full screen shake on destruction. I had to make sure that large rocks and the like shake all 4 tiles, but apart from that, this was smooth sailing to add. And also particle effects. A new modular particle manager introduces small effects for different actions. Brown dirt clouds for tilling soil, falling leaves when hitting trees, grey dust clouds when mining rocks, sparkles when striking crystals, and water droplets when watering the crops, which has to be my favourite one. I think it is so satisfying to see. How do I tackle adding new features to my indie game? I'll be showing you my process today top to bottom as I continue my complete overhaul of A Farmer's Life, while also adding in the new features of farm and quarry expansions. If you've been following this series, then you know that I've recently been going through a complete visual overhaul of the game and refining each gameplay feature as I polish off its visuals. Today I will continue that process by revamping the first 4 shops and adding the ability to expand the farm and quarry. Expanding the farm has been a frequently requested feature from playtesters, but I was initially hesitant because efficiently managing the limited space is a core challenge of the game. However, as I've added in more elements such as tier 2 crop, berry bushes, workspaces, and just a higher demand for bigger yields of crops as you unlock trading and restaurant recipes, the original farm size has become more restrictive than strategic. This change should ensure that players can keep up with the growing complexity of the game without unnecessary frustration. I want the Farm and Quarry expansion to feel significant, similar to how defeating the Wall of Flesh in Terraria marks a significant shift in gameplay in that game. Players will only be able to expand the farm once, and I place this milestone between building the fishing hut and unlocking tier 2 crops. To reinforce the momentous nature of this expansion, I also introduced several new features that unlock alongside it. I started with the general store as this was the most straightforward to update. The changes were primarily cosmetic, reskinning everything in the new colour palette and expanding elements to fill the space as I removed the bulky brown border. I also added animations for Bessa, the shopkeeper, so she blinks and occasionally plays with her hair, which makes her feel more alive. But on a different note, updating her character made me rethink my future approach to cutscenes. Initially I planned to make Stardew Valley style top-down cutscenes, but given that the game's characters are more prominently displayed in this larger, more detailed form during normal gameplay, I am considering a more visual novel-esque approach instead, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Next, I tackled the hardware store. The original background design was solid, so I mostly just recolored everything. I also added a ladder to fill some of the empty space and adjusted Andy's colours to fit the new palette, which I found particularly challenging for his hard hat and high-vis jacket, and I animated him so that he now occasionally takes a swig of beer, adding a bit more personality. Setting up the shop's interface was straightforward, but I made an optimization by having the inventory icon sprite handle the product icons instead of the hardware store sprite. This minimizes redundant assets and reduces the file size. The build menu required more refactoring. Each building now has an appropriate icon, text is displayed using the text manager, and material requirements are shown via the inventory icon sprite. I also added a tab for farm and quarry expansions. Getting the expansions to function properly was a trial and error process of adjusting variables and custom blocks. The farm expands with 5 extra rows at the top and 5 extra columns on each side, while the quarry gains 5 extra rows and columns on all directions. To populate these expanded areas, I introduced 3 new ores, Terrestrium, Starlight and Galactarine, along with 3 large stumps to help players gather the large amounts of wood needed for late game buildings. I also added 2 new workspaces, the de-seeder, which converts crops into seeds, which is especially useful for multiplying exotic crops, and the well, which allows players to refill their watering can without trekking to the bottom of the farm. These workspaces can be purchased from the hardware store once the expansion is unlocked. While working on expansions, I also optimized the crafting system. Now only recipes that use unlocked ingredients will display. For example, the animal product based recipes won't appear until the barn is built. Tier 2 crop recipes won't show until research is complete, and the recipes with the new ores won't be visible until the quarry is expanded. Additionally, I transitioned all crafting UI text to the text manager, allowing me to remove old sprites with baked in text, further reducing the clutter. I also set up crafting for the new ores, recipes for the de-seeder, and made it so that clicking the well with the watering can refills it. Revamping the blacksmith was mainly a retexture job. The background was updated, though I'm still not entirely satisfied with it. It feels a little empty compared to the other backdrops. I may add more details later. However, I'm really happy with how Mia turned out. She now stands behind an anvil, periodically hammering a piece of metal, complete with flying sparks for a bit of extra visual appeal. The shop buttons were recolored to match the blacksmith aesthetic, and I ensured that the inventory icon sprite could handle purchasing and selling bombs since they don't function like regular items. The tool upgrade page required a bit more work. I adjusted the text manager to display all the necessary upgrade information and adapted the system to accommodate 3 new upgrade levels corresponding to the new ores. This meant creating new icons for the upgraded tools and recoloring tool animations within the player rendering sprite. Finally, I overhauled the research lab. The background was recolored and I added a distillation still to fill the empty space. Derek, the researcher, now has an animation where he pours different coloured chemicals into a beaker. The research category icons were recolored to match the lab aesthetic, and upgrade icons were repurposed from the inventory and task icons. I shifted research descriptions to the text manager instead of having them baked into the art, further streamlining the system. And I also introduced 2 new research upgrades. Tree Believer, which accelerates tree regrowth, and Would You Rather, which increases wood drops. These changes address the aforementioned late game difficulty in gathering sufficient wood. Additionally, instead of separate research upgrades for iron and gold, I consolidated them into one, which also unlocks the new ores at higher levels. This update showcases how a seemingly simple addition, farm expansions, can ripple out into a web of interconnected features. Today I'll be continuing my complete overhaul of the visuals of A Farmer's Life and ensuring that everything fits nice and neatly into the game's progression path. Today we'll be continuing that process with 3 more locations. Starting with the request board, this is one of the older features in the game and it's actually really well balanced, so all it needed was a visual makeover. I expanded it out to fill the whole screen now that I've removed the big brown border that goes around the edge, and I've recolored everything to match the new palette. Since the bottom portion of the screen does need to be free to display mouse over information, I just filled that space with cobbles and bushes, and all the written information is now displayed using the text manager sprite, which helps cut down the unnecessary assets. Next up was the first unlockable location, the barn. Polishing this off was a mammoth task. I began by redoing the background for the shop space, and I did this by expanding the pile of sacks at the bottom to better fill the space. The most time consuming part was definitely recoloring the wood grain texture in the background. With the new palette, everything was more saturated before, but I think it turned out pretty sweet. I also redrew the shopkeeper, the sweet old lady Bridget. Reworking characters in the new palette is definitely the hardest part for me, especially choosing the right skin tones. That said, I do think the new version came out decently, and even if these few specific assets did look better in isolation in the old style, I think overall the game does benefit for everything being nice and consistent. I animated Bridget to blink and occasionally had her adjust her glasses, giving her a bit more life, and I gave her a drop shadow to help her stand out from the background. I then updated all the UI elements for the barn, bringing the speech bubbles and buttons for the shop and barn into line with the new style and colours. The inventory item sprite now displays the shop items, replacing the older method of using separate costumes within the barn sprite. This helps reduce asset clutter. For the barn specifically, I added the tools you can buy into the inventory item sprite as well. Since tools aren't treated as items in the game, I also made sure that when these are mouse over, the text manager displays a description of what they do instead of showing how many you have in the inventory. Redoing the background for the animals page took up the bulk of my time. It has twice the wood paneling that the shop page has, and drawing it all took forever. I also recolored and expanded the hay bales and added a patchy floor texture. The animals themselves got a recolor to match the new palette, but I didn't redesign them. I added dark outlines and shadows to make them pop and feel grounded. I also revamped the feed the animals page using the inventory item sprite to display the different feed types, again helping to reduce excess assets. With that finished, I moved on to the fishing hut, starting with the shop page background. I kept the layout mostly the same, but I recolored everything to fit the new palette. To fill some of the empty space, I added fishing nets and a newspaper cutout to tie into the story update I'm planning soon. For Felix, the shopkeeper, I really leaned into his energetic, childlike personality by having him sit up on the counter, swinging his legs back and forth, which I absolutely love. I set up all the quotes and UI just like I did for the barn, but using the fishing hut's blue colour scheme instead of the barn's red. The shop was again set up using the inventory item sprite. I also created the artwork for the river scene, where you select a net. This involves duplicating the new animated water tiles from the farm for each frame. I recolored the nets in all their different positions and gave them dark outlines to help them stand out. Finally, I redid the net page where players can refill bait or collect caught fish. Removing the old screen border really improved the layout here, as now there's enough space to show full-sized icon for each bait and fish. This allowed me to keep everything within the inventory item sprite and removes the need to draw smaller versions of items, which is super helpful for future content updates. I also increased the bait's capacity for nets. I also increased the net's bait capacity, since previously the higher level baits could entirely fill a net in one go. Today I'll be continuing with the complete overhaul of A Farmer's Life that I've been undertaking recently, by reviewing some of the mid-game features and ensuring that everything fits smoothly into the overall progression path. If you've been following this series, you know that I've been overhauling the game's visuals and refining each gameplay feature. Today I'm continuing that process by revamping the 2 late game locations, the shipping depot and the restaurant. Starting with the shipping depot, the first thing I did to this was to redo the background using the new colour palette and with the art expanded out to fill the space that used to be occupied by the brown border. I added in a keyboard and mouse to fill in some of the empty space at the bottom, and I did the wood panelling in the same style that I used in the barn. And yes, it was just as tedious to do now as it was then. I also did the UI for the shipping depot. Now the items that you can send and receive here are depicted using the inventory icon sprite rather than needing duplicate costumes in the shipping depot sprite. This helped me to keep the number of assets down. I also reworked the text manager sprite to be able to use the correct computer monitor font, and now that displays any written UI on this page. And then I moved on to the restaurant, starting with the background. This was pretty much the same process as it was for the shipping depot, but for the tiles in the background, I did these on a separate page and then copied the rest of the details on top to make my life a smidgen easier. Next, I did the art for Gaetano, the wheelchair-bound Italian restaurateur. I recolored the art that I already had and drew in a bit more of his body to compensate for the extra space that is now visible. I animated him to blink and occasionally rub his one good eye, and I gave him a drop shadow to make him stand out from the background. I also remade the UI for the restaurant, recoloring Gaetano's quote bubbles and resizing the buttons that let you select which recipe collection you want to open, and made sure that was all laid out correctly. But the bulk of my time this week was actually spent on recoloring all of the 80+ recipe icons to use the new palette. I also made a few tweaks to how this is displayed in order to save on assets. Now, locked recipes are shown in grayscale rather than by a separate costume, and instead of having a separate costume for each recipe with a completed tick, I made it so that this uses the base costume and then layers a separate tick costume over it. I also reworked the UI which displays the ingredients that you need to use the inventory icon sprite, further saving on excess asset. Today I will be continuing the complete overview of a farmer's life that I've been undertaking recently by reviewing all the areas related to character customization. If you've been following this series, you know that I've been overhauling the game's visuals and refining each gameplay feature as I do. Today I am continuing that process by revamping the last two shops and the character customization menus. Starting with the furniture store, I redid the background detail using the new palette and expanded it to fill the entire screen. I added some extra details like a Mandela spiral flower pattern to fill in the empty space, and placed a mortar and pestle on the shelves for a bit more visual interest. Next, I turned my attention to the shopkeeper Sasha. I think I mentioned in the last episode that I'm not a fan of recoloring people into the new palette, mainly because getting the skin tone to look even remotely natural is a bit of a pain. But I got it done, and I added some animation, standard blinking, and a gentle shrug to bring her to life. Then I moved on to the UI for the shop. I recolored all of Sasha's quote bubbles and updated the buttons to indicate whether floors, walls, or furniture are currently being displayed. To get everything working correctly, I had to ensure that each different wall and floor had a properly colored icon in the inventory item sprite. This approach saves 2 costumes per wall and floor compared to how I was doing it before with the furniture store sprite. Now, instead of using 2 separate costumes to show whether an item has been purchased or not, I use the same base sprite for both with a tick icon layered over it if needed. With the furniture store complete, I moved on to the clothes store, repeating the same process for the background. This time I added more detail to the coat on the hat stand and introduced a small shelving unit stocked with spare fabrics and some Shakespearean props, candles, and even a skull. I can only assume someone's been performing Hamlet. These extra shelves not only help fill the space but also reduce the amount of wood grain that I had to draw in the background, repetitive and tedious task that I'm always glad to minimise. I also updated the colour palette for Santi. Since he's Sasha's twin brother, this was actually a bit easier. I already knew which colours to use for his skin and hair, and a simple suit made things a bit more straightforward. To give him a bit more personality, I added a sewing machine. He occasionally stitches away at a piece of fabric, adding a touch of animation. The UI for the clothes store was much simpler. It functions like any other shop in the game, so once I had everything recolored, it all worked smoothly right away. With both shops done, I turned my attention to the character customization window. I kept the core layout the same, but most of the text is now displayed using the font manager rather than being baked into the costumes. I also ensured that the outline on the player character renders correctly. Additionally, I added the option for the player to enter their name, which will be useful once I move on to the story portion of the game. Lastly, I revamped the wardrobe screen, updating all the assets to match the new style. I removed the old back button and replaced it with one that appears on the icon bar, similar to the setup when you open a workspace. This helped keep things clean and consistent. If you've been following this series, you know that I've been overhauling the game's visuals and refining each gameplay feature. Today I'll be discussing the next stages for the project while you watch me up the graphics overhaul that I've been undergoing for the past couple of months. This time around, most of the art I redid was cleaning up stray menus that had flown under the radar, like the build and music menus in the farmhouse, the settings tab, and the start screen. Honestly, there's not a ton to say about those. It was mainly a matter of applying the new palette and repositioning things to look right now that the big brown border is gone. Nothing too exciting, just straightforward polish work. So let's talk about something more interesting. What comes next? Finishing the graphic overhaul officially marks the end of the first phase of this update. From here on out, I'll be focusing primarily on the game's story, starting with the friendship cutscenes for each of the NPCs. I'm still deciding on the style, whether to go with the Stardew Valley route with the smaller character sprites in the actual game world, or something more visual novel-esque using the larger shopkeeper versions of the NPCs. Please let me know if you have an opinion either way. But either way, the system will work similarly to Stardew Valley. You'll unlock cutscenes by becoming better friends with NPCs, which happens when you fulfill their requests at the bulletin board. I'm also planning to tie friendship progression into unlocking new items, such as furniture and outfits available at the respective shops as you grow closer to the townsfolk. On another note, if you're interested, I'm considering running a game jam. It would be a scratch jam, so entries would have to be made in Scratch, and the winner would receive a free copy of A Farmer's Life when it releases. Let me know if that's something that you'd want to participate in. As I move on to the story portion of development, I'll probably have to tweak the format of these devlogs a bit. I obviously don't want to spoil the narrative, so I won't be going too deep into story details. Well, unless you ask nicely, maybe I'll share just one character's story. Instead, I'll start doing more in-depth posts on things like how I'm handling music composition or player dialogue systems and other behind-the-scenes stuff. Hopefully you'll find that just as interesting anyway. Honestly, I'm so excited to be entering the final stretch of development before the first official release. The end is finally in sight, and I'm so happy with how the graphic overhaul turned out. The difference is night and day. Looking back, I can't believe I ever liked how the game used to look. But apart from that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did. It lets me know that this is something that you want to see more of. Join the Discord, link down below, and I'll see you next week with another video. Bye!